Welcome to the Top Order podcast. With the IPL just returning from hiatus, we're going to talk cricketing news from around the world. We'll, of course, start with Jimmy Anderson's comeback for Lancashire, a couple of polls on return. That isn't on the run sheet, by the way. We will, of course, talk about the IPL resumption. Rohit and Virat both announcing their Test cricket retirements. England and Zimbabwe just about to take place. We'll talk about the warm-up game there. That's the first-class counties versus the Zimbabwean Test squad. We'll also talk some more Test cricket with the World Test Championship squads being announced, the New Zealand coaching search, and any other business. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, I logged into my BBC Cricket this morning to see a resplendent James Anderson in his Lancashire jersey with the single arm up celebration. So he's back, which means Test cricket must be back, although he won't be playing at this stage. But who knows? Who knows? But yeah, as I said in the intro, I think we are at the stage where we've got some Red Bull cricket coming up around the world, and wanting to obviously talk about that. But obviously some big news as well in India with, the last sort of couple of weeks being relatively uncertain. Stu, you've got as up-to-date a list of the comings and goings and which overseas players return, and I believe some replacement overseas players coming in for the last few games. I think I saw a tweet. Johnny Bairstow might be missing some cricket for Yorkshire because he's flying out. But yeah, we'll talk the permutations there. Where do we want to kick off? Do we want to talk about the playoff permutations first, or the players and the personnel?
I reckon we start with the players because, look, we were supposed to, we're recording this on Sunday night here in New Zealand. And look, firstly, as you said, Binksy, thoughts go out to everyone in India and Pakistan. Obviously, it's been a pretty tough time for everyone over there and uncertain. And cricket obviously comes second when stuff like that is going on. So, I hope everyone is starting to get back to normal and things. And I suppose on that, we look at this tournament and there's a massive list of players that are coming in and out, and it's going to change things hugely. I won't run through all of them because there's a lot, but you look at some of the top teams. So we've got GT, you're going to have Buttler and Rabada missing from the playoffs. On Rabada's side, he's been out for a little while anyway, so, maybe not such of a loss there. We've got RCB, who are going to be missing Jacob Bethel and Lungi Ngidi for the playoffs. We don't know what's going to happen to Josh Hazlewood. The Aussies, seems to be a lot of the Aussies that, aren't quite, or haven't at least confirmed. Seemed like most of them left straight away. Will they come back? We don't know. Hazlewood's obviously in the World Test Championship squad. That's a quick turnaround. So, I'd actually be surprised what do you think Australia will do? Will they put any pressure on them to not play in that?
I don't think they'll put pressure on them to not play, but I think the priority for Australian cricket will be very clear in that we want to win the World Test Championship final. And so, make of that what you will, Messrs. Hazlewood, Cummins, Starc and co. I know Starc's already said that he's not going to go back to the IPL. And I would be surprised if any of the guys who are locked into that World Test Championship final squad go for any length of time. I don't even know what Josh Hazlewood was going to do if RCB made the playoffs and, everything was going to the normal schedule, because it would have been quite a quick turnaround to get from the back end of the IPL into readiness for the World Test Championship final. So he would have been under time pressure there. But I would be surprised if any of those, even the fringe Aussies like Inglis and such, were in that position to go back to the IPL at this point.
Yeah, well, you talk about the Punjab Kings. You've named Inglis there. He's, TBC, Stoinis, Hardy as well in that boat. We've got Marco Janssen's going to be missing for the playoffs for them. Kyle Jamieson's in now for Lockie Ferguson. There are a lot of changes. And, even Mumbai, Will Jackson, Ryan Rickleton out for the playoffs, Corbin Bosch too. Those two or three of those guys have been in every single lineup. Binksy mentioned him before. Johnny Bairstow coming over. Richard Gleeson joining the Mumbai squad as well. So, look, those are just the top four teams. And, it's huge changes. So, look, it's quite hard to then, I think personally, there's not much value in us going through the playoff permutations because I think it's a case, right, of you get hot now for 3 or 4 games. Like we were sitting there before thinking, okay, we've got a whole bunch of teams. These teams are looking good. Now it all is all up in the air. And Jamie, I'll come to you because I feel like I feel like Buttler's a massive loss for GT.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've waxed lyrical about their consistency in that sort of batting lineup, and now all of a sudden it is creating a massive hole. But it also can create an opportunity for some of the other players. It means there's a bit more emphasis on the remaining players, I guess. Shubman Gill, Sai Siddharthan, does it increase the pressure on those two? Although they've been fantastically consistent throughout. It feels like, they're having to change their approach when you don't want to change your approach. But they're not the only team. There's a lot of teams that, RCB would be the same, they're having to make, I guess, yeah, ad hoc changes to kind of their method when it probably matters the most. And from a viewer perspective, it does probably open it up more. It opens the tournament up. But if you've kind of worked so hard to get to this stage and now all of a sudden you're not sure which players are coming back, etc., it kind of feels like it's not undermining the tournament, but it's just kind of, I don't know, maybe just taking the edge off it a little bit, perhaps. And you want the best players there, arguably, I suppose. But yeah, I'd just be slightly concerned with GT now, in terms of how they go about. Well, you can't replace Buttler, can you? So it's almost what do you change your approach, or who are you bringing in, and what's the method going to be? But yeah, watch this space, I think.
I think it's really difficult, isn't it? There's obviously political reasons that this tournament won't be completed on time. It wasn't a cricketing scenario this time round, but I think the counter argument to all of this, and certainly for the England guys that are going to fly home, is, and Jos Buttler particularly, he's just stood down as white ball captain. Obviously, England playing West Indies in an ODI series. There will have been fans that have bought tickets for probably 90, 100, maybe north of that in pounds to see England's best white ball team. And I think it would have been a PR disaster for the ECB if Buttler, because I'm sure he's on all the posters, and I'm sure all the kids would want to see Jos Buttler in that England shirt. So I'm glad in a way, and I don't know how this would have happened. My perception is I don't think someone like Jos Buttler would have even asked to stay. I think he knows, and I think deep down most of those English centrally contracted players will know we get really, really well looked after by the ECB. Similarly, the Australians will do. Given no objection certificates, given the ability to play in these tournaments when there's a lot of cricket going on. So I can see why, particularly those England players, going back. Probably a little bit tougher for the West Indies board to convince some of their chaps with the financial disparity. But yeah, Stu, as you said, it's just such a shame that we've had this delay to what is a really long tournament already. So to extend the window by a couple of weeks is kind of unrealistic in the context of an 8-week tournament becoming a 10 or 11 week gig.
I tell you what it does do. You go, Jamie.
Yeah, I just wonder from a player perspective though, if you've been involved, and you've got your team on the brink, and then you're not able to kind of see it through. It's almost like, I'm wondering how you'd feel there. I was thinking personally, I'd feel a bit maybe dejected and a bit, I don't know. But then, like you say, unforeseen circumstances have made this sort of progress further than it would need to, which has then had a knock-on effect. So maybe it's that. But yeah, I just kind of feel for somebody like Buttler in particular that has, kind of had a bit of a resurgence this season in the IPL, got his team on the brink of maybe greatness, as it were, and he's not able to probably see that through. But yeah, I don't know what you folks think on that.
I think it's going to be fascinating this next week or two, because I think going up to the point where the IPL paused, I think we had a reasonably good idea about who the best four sides were. I think that was reasonably clear based on form. But now, the Yahtzee cubes have been thrown into the mixer, and it's not a lottery, but there's door open now for Delhi Capitals in particular, I think, who are at 6-4, I think, with a no result, with 3 games to play. One out of the playoffs. I think they play. Gujarat, Mumbai, and Punjab. So they're playing teams around them on the ladder. The door is ajar for them. Less so for LSG. I think they've got to win 3 games of their final 3 to get to the point where they could be challenging for the playoffs. But, so much is in flux now. It will be the team that handles that the best, the team that's got the biggest, or not the biggest, but the most stable core of Indian players, I think, that are going to, be seeing themselves through here in better shape than some of the teams that are so reliant on their overseas players, particularly their opening bats. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of chaos is opening partnerships and top 3s having to be mixed and matched and changed around in this final week and a half of fixtures. So it's going to be very interesting to see what transpires in these final 2 or 3 round robin games before we get to finals.
Your point, Jamie, around the players, that's something I think about a lot, right? That these players that are going from tournament to tournament, and even we saw it in like the IPL T20 and the Big Bash and SA T20. Some of them were playing like 1 week for this team, then 2 weeks for that team, and switching around all the time. It must be really, really difficult in terms of how they're kind of figuring. I'd love to get an honest answer about like, do you actually care? Like, do you actually care about these teams? Are you invested in any way, or are you invested fully? Because, I don't know. It's because I think that investment, surely, I mean, psychologically, as a team, team building wise, it must make a huge difference if you've got a core group of guys that are there and going, like, we genuinely want to win for this group and for this team.
Yeah, mate.
I think there's... Yeah, go on. Sorry, Binksy.
I was just going to quickly say, Stu, and this is going to be a terrible link, actually. I listened to a podcast the other day with one of the sort of franchise cricket globetrotters. I can't remember who it was. I will dig it out and we'll maybe throw it in the comments section. But they were essentially saying, I play for 17 different teams or something like that. And he said it does take a little bit of a while to build your affinity. He said, when you're on the park and you're playing, you're obviously fully invested. But when you then got to fly off somewhere else, when you've played for that franchise for 2 or 3 seasons, you're really keen to get there. When you've done a short gig for your first time in a tournament with a new team. So I think that it's going to be down to the player, and obviously you build loyalty and build that affinity just like you do as a fan over a period of time. And then on a flippant note, Jesus, I'm playing a combination of red ball and white ball club cricket at the moment. I can't remember which pads to take. Can you imagine if you got like you'd have the gold pads, the red pads, the blue pads. It would be a bloody nightmare. But yeah, Jay, I think you were probably going to say something far more sensible and insightful.
Well, not really, other than I think we've said in the past there is this emergence now of what we call the nomadic athlete in world sport. And it's kind of like the individual, particularly in cricket, it's like this individual sport kind of approach, like the tennis player, the golfer, where they've got their kind of their team and their entourage, and they will just drop into tournaments. And we're starting to see that a little bit now, where players will come in and they will already have an S&C coach, they will have a batting coach, they will have a bowling coach, and they will have these because then they know they're going to be at a short time somewhere else where they might not have the time to integrate into that coaching setup or whatever. I think from a team investment perspective, I think it is hard, and do they care? You'd like to think they care, absolutely. But I think if you've got somebody who's very values driven, that they will come in and be the best version of themselves, that they're not just there for the page. So, they'll drop in and they'll just deliver because they're super professional and diligent in what they do. But I think it brings a really interesting dynamic to not only kind of like the identity of the player, but also the team identity as well. If you've got these people coming in and you've worked really hard on getting everybody together and building that affinity, and then all of a sudden they leave, somebody else comes in, do you start again? Or do you just bring them in and they have to accept all the processes that you've got? Like, do they have a say? It makes it really quite fascinating, but also quite challenging, I think. But I think the best environments welcome these people. I also think the best nomads, if you like, are just really, really super professional in what they do, and they just kind of come in and from sort of day one they go about their business. They have an approach, and yeah, they deliver. But I think it is interesting, absolutely, and the burnout perspective of these players as well. No one's probably going to be telling them too much unless they're centrally contracted when to have a break, because they are essentially their own business. So you run the risk of injury and psychological burnout and so forth. So I'm not sure that was any more sensible, Binksy, than what you were offering, but probably put the viewers to sleep.
And it was and it was a podcast with David Visa. There you go. So that was. I'm pretty sure it was on the Following On cricket podcast. Yeah. So yeah, go and take a listen to that. I'm fine to promote another cricket podcast.
Obviously not as good as this one, but
No, it's not. It's definitely not. Let's not go into that.
But before we do quickly move on to, before we move on to the next topic, I will just say the one thing, one big thing I am hoping to see in these last couple of weeks, just from a purely New Zealand point of view, is to see Will O'Rourke, who has come into LSG for Mayan Kadav. Obviously not a replacement for an overseas player, but yeah, comes in for a little short stint. And I would love to see him on that stage. We've seen him, over the past year, I suppose, develop in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different environments for New Zealand. It'd be really cool to see him just get a couple of games under his belt in the IPL, get that experience, see how he goes. So yeah, very much looking forward to that. Hopefully he doesn't just come over and sit on the bench for a few games.
Yeah. And of course, for listeners and viewers, we will, continue to cover the IPL as we get to the shakedown. So, games obviously recommencing as we speak, really. So next week we'll have plenty to chat about, and I think we'll have a clearer picture, won't we, on the playoffs by that point as well. So we can start to preview and review some of that cricket. Let's stay close to India with the next segment. How big are these two announcements? So both Rohit Sharma and then followed by Virat Kohli. And the Virat Kohli one, the way it got reported on Cricinfo initially was it wasn't cryptic, but it wasn't Virat Kohli retires. It was Virat Kohli has told the board that he's going to retire. So, was that was that him trying to get a counter offer? In HR speak, and just give us another year as CEO, Virat. But yeah, let's unpack both of those. Yeah, but both of those leading into a series that I think both Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma, have talked about as being a big one for India, being that series in England this summer.
There is just so many angles to this, isn't there? I mean, one, we've got Rohit Sharma announcing his retirement, and then there being a huge, massive news cycle about that, and then 24 hours later, I think it was, Virat Kohli just completely usurping him in the news cycle. I was actually talking to bumped into Raj today, and we were talking about Virat Kohli, and I was like, oh yeah, and Rohit, and he's like, what? Rohit? He'd kind of missed that because there was so much news about Virat retiring that the Rohit only had his tiny little short window that, now it's all onto Virat Kohli. But I don't know. I mean, there are, like you said, Binksy, there are different ways about how it all went down. Yeah, I have so many questions. But Baldy, I mean, what were your first thoughts when these two, that these two are no longer going to be there? We're not going to get a chance to farewell them in any way. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the long, protracted, drawn-out farewell tour.
You didn't want them to name their last game 12 months in advance? Without
getting into all that malarkey. It would have been nice to see.
Has someone done that?
I came into this podcast thinking, gee, it'd be good to get in touch with the boys again and have a bit of a yarn about cricket. I'm starting to maybe miss my time off now.
I've missed you, mate. I've missed you.
Look, it's going to be sad. I find myself thinking, gee, it would have been nice to see Virat score one more 100. It would have been nice to see Rohit have that one defining moment in a series against England in England where he took a match away from England in a half an hour or 45-minute session with the bat. it will completely change the complexion of that Indian Test side going forward. There are huge opportunities now in that batting order for young players to step up, and there's all sorts of fascinating permutations about how that could play out for this Indian team. But I feel it's a good time for them to retire, because I feel myself wanting more from them, both of them really, more so Virat than Rohit. So it tells me that they probably retired at the right time, where I'm thinking, oh, gee, it would have been nice to hear from them one more time, rather than going, actually, well, they probably had one too many test matches in their career and it was time for them to go. So look, kudos to them for picking a good time to retire, but I would have loved to have seen them play one more series against England in England and conquer that frontier yet again if they could.
Can someone tell me, I mean, am I being controversial by thinking Rohit has, maybe pushed is a strong word, but I get the feeling he's been told, hey, we probably weren't going to pick you on the squad for England. Is that a controversial statement in any way?
No, I don't think it is at all, is it? I think that's probably how a lot of teams would operate, and rather than getting into this protracted retirement and these, kind of swan song events, it's kind of like, actually, it's pro sport, it's tough. We need the best players. We want to pick the best teams to be competitive, and they've strategized it, and they've gone, actually, maybe in 12 months, 24 months, it doesn't fit in. So we're planning, we're future proofing. So I don't think it's controversial in that. I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
It is sad, though, that he dropped himself before the end of that Border Gavaskar Trophy, and that was the last time we saw him in a test test jumper. Right? It's a real shame for his test career to finish.
That's the way it ended.
Like that. For a guy who was so dominant and gave us so much excitement, so much joy to watch, even as someone who watched him tear Australia to pieces on occasion, for his test career to end like that it's a real shame, really, to be fair.
Yeah, and Stu, I think if you look at some of what he said, he's talked about, scoring runs in Test cricket again. So it does feel as if either he's had a change of heart or he's had a tap on the shoulder. I wonder whether the BCCI knew about Kohli at the time. They might have been having those conversations, because the only thing I would say is, yes, we know India have got a massive amount of strength in depth. We've talked about that ad infinitum on the podcast. But you've seen in relatively recent times, with the England team, what happens when you take two absolute guns, and it was two bowling guns in Broad and Anderson coming out of that side in relatively close succession. A tour to England is a tough tour for any visiting side. The ball nips around a little bit. It is a difficult place, I think, to go and play. To take two guys out of a batting group, notwithstanding the quality that still remains in that squad, I just wonder whether that's the best move long term. I think you would want one of those elder statesmen around on that tour. And I think both of them as well would have been big enough to not be in the top six and be like, you'll go in as the spare batter, the batting mentor, the guy that provides that experience to the squad. I don't think either of them would have had any qualms about that, because let's be honest, Kohli's Baldy's probably got the stats better than I have, but I think he's had a pretty big decline after COVID, hasn't he? With his test match numbers, Virat. So that's the bit that puzzles me, is that you are taking, what is it, probably best part of 20,000 runs out of the side in a short space of time.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that it's going to hurt India the most, is now that you've got a six-man or a six-person batting lineup without Virat, without Rohit as those experienced guys kind of holding the team together through those thin patches where the ball does a little bit. You need someone to dig in for 45 minutes. A lot's going to rest on KL Rahul's shoulders now, as now the senior statesman in that batting lineup. There'll be lots of youth, exuberance, fearless play around him, but from a cool heads experience perspective, a lot's going to rest on his shoulders. And we've seen him perform, not miracles for India, but we've seen him pull India through some very tough situations in the last 3 or 4 years, but a lot's going to rest on his broad shoulders and calm, experienced, composed mentality going forward, because a lot of those Indian players will be experiencing England, if not for the first time, then only for the second time. And, you learn a lot by playing in England, but you also can be taught some very, very harsh lessons very, very quickly in those conditions.
I think it is important to say, as Binksy started to allude to, these two have not had a good, I was going to say 12 months, 18 months. If you want to go a bit even further than that with Virat, it's not been good. So I don't, obviously these, there's the legacy there. I think in Rohit's case especially, in terms of when people look back at his overall numbers, I think it feels to me like he is someone who's contributed more than a 40 average sort of play, like if we go through and, when you do your Hall of Fame and those kind of things, he's contributed something extra with his leadership and the way he's sort of taken that team through. Virat's obviously done the same in terms of his leadership and then stepping aside, and his batting peaks, if we want to think about all of that kind of stuff. But it does, even taking out two guys who, as you say, maybe haven't been performing to the level that you might expect from those names and those averages, it does. Yeah, we are almost at a new Indian team. Like from this golden generation, there are not that many left. If we're looking through that side, there's Jadeja, there's Bumrah, and there's KL Rahul. They're about the only three sort of left from this experienced group that played a lot of test matches left, given that Ashwin's now gone. We've seen Kohli, with likes of Rahane, Pujara, big names in Indian cricket that are now not going to be there. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting kind of 12, 18 months. I don't know where we go next. Do we want to talk about legacy for these two before we talk about kind of who is going to fill these massive boots?
I'll just make a quick comment around. We can only comment on what we see in terms of their behaviours on the pitch, but it feels like a massive void that we're left potentially there in terms of leadership. Like him or loathe his approach on the pitch, Kohli has been labelled a fierce competitor, and I think he's probably someone that we would all want in our team because of his drive for high standards, and sometimes that's not always great because it can be quite perfectionistic and it can undermine people. But I think his competitiveness and his leadership, I think, and Rohit as well, they're fierce competitors, demand very high standards, and I think your concern is are you going for a different type of approach now, or you're essentially losing that that bit of spite that can often be the difference on the pitch. And I don't know, we can't comment what they're like in the changing room because we don't know, but certainly what we see, they're big personalities that potentially again is leaving a big space. Personally, I feel a bit robbed that I won't get to see them in England this year, both of them. It would have been nice, but it plays to that idea of sentimentality, and that's not what sport is about. But I would have liked to have seen them play again. I think they both have brought so much to the game in different ways. And, I think always for me, it will be about Kohli being very aesthetically pleasing. I always felt that I never see anybody perhaps as close to Tendulkar, and I feel as though he got very close to that in terms of that the shapes that he would create and just the way he looked. It would just look so good on the eye and often very effortless, and that big bat and the top hand. He's very graceful, I think. So I will miss that, but feel privileged that I've had the opportunity to have seen him a few times. So I'm sorry we touched on legacy a little bit there, but the leadership thing I think is a big gap for them.
Yeah, on the legacy piece, I think the legacy that I think Rohit, when we kind of look back, he was, in my view, one of the best three format players going around. Really difficult to do that, I think, and he did that for a pretty decent period of time. Kohli, the legacy, I think, is that he, through that force of personality, raised the standards of that Indian team, particularly from a fitness and a fielding perspective. And he did that because he was able to, as a batsman, just be almost without Pia in his his purple patch. And but Baldy, again, we'll probably talk about this on a future Hall of Fame or something like that. But yeah, the biggest compliment I think I can pay him. He's a lot like Ricky Ponting. I hated Ricky Ponting until the day that he retired. And then I was able to look back and go, that bloke was a genius. And I would have hated to play against Virat Kohli, but you would have loved it if he'd have, said, actually, I've got an English grandmother. I'm doing my qualification period. You'd have been like, boom, we'll have you as soon as you're ready, son. So, I think one of those guys that when you line up against him, you kind of think everything he does on the field winds you up, and then he backs it up with the bat. But when you look back at the joy that he has brought, I think he's in the Ponting and Shane Warne and then Glenn McGrath category for me. People I hated at the time, but when you look back at it after they've retired, you're just like, it was such a privilege to have seen them step onto the field in your home country and watch them play cricket.
It's a really good point.
Sorry, Baldy.
Just before you jump in there, Jamie, I think that the underrated thing that I think India are going to miss, because they're not going to, like, if you have a look at the last 5 years, Kohli averaged 30. I think if the last 2 or 3 years, whatever Rohit average, it's probably below 40. So India aren't necessarily going to miss that run scoring in there. They're not going to miss that production in their order, right? Binksy nailed it. What they're going to miss is who's going to set the standard in the field. Who's going to set the belief in the team that no matter what the situation, we can still win the game? Who's going to stand up when the going gets tough and go, right, stand on me, team. I'm nailed on for 100 here. You just bat around me and I'm going to take the game away from the opposition, either with runs at the wicket or just that mentality in the field. And I'm with you, Binksy. I would not have wanted to play Virat Kohli because I would have been in a confrontation with him in every single game, because he is one of those characters that you just cannot help but engage with. And the more you engage with him, the better he gets and the better his teammates get, because he's the talisman for the team. So I feel like India are going to miss that more than any amount of replacement run production from whoever one of the 11 to 17 potential candidates to replace him that could all average 45 plus at Test cricket level. It's going to be who's going to step up from a mentality leadership perspective. I think it's going to be the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I mean, on that, I have a question about that in a second. I will just say, because I know that this is a much bigger... I wanted an answer to this question, but I know that it's a much bigger conversation now that we've started to talk about it. But I think it is really interesting. You look at Virat's overall career, 123 tests, 9,230 runs at an average of 46.85. The first of that Fab Four to kind of step away from Test cricket. Smith's average is 56. Williamson's is a tick under 55. Roots is almost 51 and climbing. I do think it is going to be fascinating how we look at him in 20 years. Like if we were doing your Test cricket rankings,
and we will.
In 20 years' time,
in 20 years' time we're doing that, are we?
Well, I will be. I'll be shouting at clouds by then. We might not be friends still, but I'll be shouting at clouds to whoever will listen to me at that point. Yeah,
because the peak is so special, right? But I don't know. It's a much bigger conversation. So let's save that for another episode. But who does fill these boots, boys? Because it sounds like the reading the tea leaves, Shubman Gill is going to maybe take over as captain. Largely, I think from whatever we're reading, it's because they might like to give it to Bumrah. But Bumrah's a bowler and someone they're going to have to manage maybe throughout his career in terms
bowlers
of...
can't be captains.
Well, Captain Cummins seems to be doing an okay job, but
he's an all-rounder.
But anyway,
I'm just trying to get a bite out of Michael.
Gill taking over that leadership, but they're going to have to fill a couple of spots here in the batting lineup. We've got, we don't know what's going to happen with KL Rahul. Okay. There's all these sorts of names that have been out there. Sai Siddharthan, Karun Nair is in that Indian A squad.
Refer to Baldy's comment, mate. There's 11 guys that will come in, and I think anybody that comes in now into that side, because of the legacy that Rohit and Virat have created, and because of the strength of that team, I guarantee whoever comes in averages between 46.34 and 50. They're gonna come in and produce.
The challenge that they might end up getting themselves into, though, is are they going to try 6, 7, 8 people and discard them quickly in the search for the next Virat Kohli, right? Is this going to be the same as, the next Shane Warne, we discard 12 spinners. The next David Warner, we discard 5 or 6 openers for Australia. The next Michael Jordan. There were 28 next Michael Jordans between 1998 and 2003.
Still going, aren't we?
We're still looking for the next. But the challenge for anyone stepping into that Indian team is you are forever going to be compared to Virat and Rohit in terms of your production. And if you fall anywhere short of that, there will be some sections of the Indian public that will be, or the Indian fan base that will be going, well, what about this guy? What about this guy? So
they've already
the challenge
replaced
you get into,
Rohit, though, guys. They've already replaced Rohit with Jaiswal, haven't they?
Yeah. But they had to bring KL Rahul into open, and maybe KL Rahul should go back to the middle order, and someone else should open, and is Pant's form good enough? And Jadeja's going to be going soon at 6. I think there's just, we'll see when we see the squad, right? When they name their squad, they've named their India A squad. There's a few interesting names in there about all up and down that lineup.
Fair enough.
Sai Siddharthan, someone we've talked about a lot. He's joining that India A squad for the India tour, but for the England tour. But yeah, it's fascinating to see these two go, and then it's fascinating just the amount of questions that it throws up alongside that for a side that has been a number one test side for so long. Most of the past decade, right? So yeah.
I think what you have to start to do, though, is this is kind of like India 2.0 rather than using that language like who's going to be the next. It's kind of like, well, okay, that story's now finished. We have to now create a new narrative because there will always be that comparison, and you can't control what the media compare, but internally it's like, okay, well, this is a new brand that we're having to develop. The biggest compliment I could always give Kohli, I think, is, and this is be a concern I would have for the Red Bull team moving forward, is that he was such a big advocate of Test cricket. So and in a world where there's always this kind of shift in sands between white ball, white ball and red ball, he was such a big advocate, and it was kind of like that is your core business as a professional cricketer. Like that's where you solidify your hallmark and your brand and so forth. The franchise stuff is the nice to have, but that's where you earn your business. And I guess my concern is that are there still people in that red ball environment that are so passionate about Test cricket, and
that's a massive concern, and that's why that conversation in 20 years' time is going to be really interesting if we are talking about players having created their legacy in franchise cricket, because at the moment none of them are really creating their legacy in franchise cricket. They're building upon it to a large extent. I'm sure there's a few exceptions, someone like an Andre Russell, for example, but the reality is that those guys built that franchise ability on their red ball credentials. Will we see that that diminish? And I think when we talk about Virat and when we talk about Sachin as well, to a large extent, we talk about what they've done in Test cricket. We almost gloss over the fact that Sachin scored 50 one-day international hundreds and played about 4,000 games or something like that. And we don't even include that in the conversation. We're just talking about the red ball, the red ball stuff. Baldy's just reeled off the top of his head, and granted he is a savant, but he's just reeled off, the big fours, exact precise averages. I bet he couldn't do that with their one-day averages. Actually, I bet he probably could, but yeah, it is that changing in the narrative of the game of cricket as well that I think, and yeah, with Virat Kohli being almost single-handed in saying Test cricket is so important to India, the Border Gavaskar is so important, going and playing in England is so important. I wonder whether that just now diminishes India's sort of focus on Test cricket. And then we're in, look, that's a whole other podcast, but we're in a lot of trouble then, I think, if India opt out of Test cricket. And when I say opt out, they're not going to not play, of course, but if they sort of change that level of priority on it, I think we're in real strife, as they would say, in Australia.
Scary, Binksy. What have you done? What have you done there? You might have to transition us to another topic because we're getting into some dark territory.
Okay, well, there is no bigger series than England Zimbabwe, so let's move across to that. But no, jokes aside, resurgence for Zimbabwe. They tied a series or drew a series with Bangladesh in Bangladesh. So won a game there, which is not an easy thing to do. There's plenty of people that have slipped on those banana skins in recent time. But they're currently having a little bit of a tune-up, I think, for the one-off Test match in a week or so's time against the first-class counties select 11. So to put that into perspective, that is a bunch of guys that aren't playing in this round of county championship matches pretty much. And we won't go too much into the results, but it looks like it's a pretty good wicket. We've got scores of 400 in both third and fourth innings pretty much, and 330 in the first innings. But they're gonna be facing England in a little over a week's time. Jay, what have you got your eye on? Particularly, I guess, with the England squad that's been announced for this game.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about it a few weeks ago. Yeah, I don't really know how to call this. It feels a little bit like the warm up for the Lord Mayor's show, which is always like these one-off Test matches have historically been in the English summer. It's almost like we're just waiting for the 5 Test series to come. The squad that England have got though, it feels pretty strong. It feels like there's probably not too many people to come into that, given the current injuries. So I think we were speaking the other week about, you've got Josh Tong to come in there. Like what's the bowling makeup? It feels like a little bit more of an experiment for the bowling lineup than it does the batting lineup. It feels like the batting is relatively solidified for the summer and looking forward. But I think the bowling unit is still kind of like, this feels like a bit of a real world experiment. Move away from the nets, open net practice. Let's get out in the middle. Let's try a few things, few permutations. Maybe Josh Tong comes on first change. Does he take the new ball? Does he not? These type of things. I think Sam Cook again. We sort of wax lyrical about his first class numbers and why he'd perhaps not got a gig at this point. So it feels like he has to take the new ball. Nothing more than that, really, Binksy. That's not particularly insightful, but it just feels like a bit of a warm-up kind of event, really. Get into that red ball stuff, Test cricket, with a view to the India series.
Can one of you boys tell me a bit about a guy who might not even play in James Roux, who's been brought in for Jordan Cox? I mean, he's a name that I have spotted. I did spot him last year, putting up some big numbers. It seems like maybe he's doing the same again. You talked about the settled batting lineup, and when you do look through that England lineup, it does seem like, aside from maybe Pope and what they're going to do there, it does seem like there is a core group of players now. But is there a chance for someone like Roux? Tell me about him as a player, and is there a chance is he someone that's young and that we are expecting to see big things of in the next 12 months?
I'll take the first stab at it, and I'm sure Jamie can add as well. I think he's been in and around the England pathways for a long time, so has played under 19s, has played Lions cricket. Again, I'm not always the best with my stats, but I think he's the youngest, if not one of the youngest players to 10 first-class hundreds. Beating someone like, I don't know, Dennis Compton.
Compton was the last one to do it in 39. There you go. Boom.
Yeah. So So he's got a pedigree. He's another one of these guys that keeps wicket. So we could have a top order with 6 wicket keepers, which isn't a bad thing in any sense. Particularly if you want a bit of shite off spin at some point from one of the ones without the gloves. To answer your question, Lip, I don't see him necessarily. Well, I don't see him playing this Test match unless someone does a digit in the warm ups. To be honest, I think he's there as batting cover. The bigger question for me, and Jamie mentioned it a little bit in his preamble, I think that the squad is relatively settled. The one question mark I really, really have for England is what happens when Jacob Bethel gets back. He'd gone and prioritised his IPL contract ahead of the start of the English summer. I think I was looking at a shootout between him and Ollie Pope for that other batting spot in that side. And then I think, from a bowling perspective, we will hopefully see the return of Jofra Archer sometime throughout this summer when they can get his workload to the point that he's going to be able to play some Test cricket. And then I think where that sort of goes is Mark Wood has just had 3 operations on his knee. It was 1 operation, but they did 3 things at the same time. So they really want to get, I think, at least 2 of Stone, Archer, and Wood on the plane to Australia. Tong offers something a little bit different. He's tall. He probably bowls a little bit quicker than the rest of the guys outside of those 3. So I think the word on the street is he will play at Trent Bridge, which is now his home ground as well. So it made the move across from Worcestershire to Nottinghamshire not too long ago. And then I absolutely think we're going to see Sam Cook. And I think if you don't give him the new ball, what's the point really? Like that's his craft, that's his trade. I think that's the fairest way to judge whether he is the guy to replace, and I use the word replace in inverted commas. He's the guy to replace Jimmy Anderson because he's that sort of 82, 83 mile an hour, swings it and seams it. So, he's got some of those tools. He's not, in my view, Jimmy Anderson's class, clearly. That there probably never will be anybody, certainly from a numbers perspective, that does that. But that's the way I think that they're looking to shape up. And then the final one from me is they have put all of their stock on Shoaib Bashir again. We talked about this, I think, a couple of weeks ago on the pod, averaging 40 with the ball in Test cricket. He's probably got 6 Test matches now over the course of this summer. And it's going to be very difficult to change who you stick on the plane as your spinner to Australia, regardless of how he goes over the course of the summer. So really big summer for Shoaib Bashir as well. And then, sorry, I did say that was the final thing. The other final thing is Ben Stokes is looking absolutely lean and, probably different to when he last did I think it was his hamstring in Pakistan as well. But he rushed back into that series, and I'm pretty sure he only played as a batter in the first game. And you're kind of going, is he going to bowl? And then he turned up in the second game in Pakistan and bowled a load of overs. He's had a lot longer to get himself back from this injury, which obviously happened some time ago now. So I think he's coming back and he's ready to do all 3 things. Bat, bowl, and field as well as captain. So. He looks like he means serious business. There you go. That's England from my perspective.
Can I add one more final thing to Binksy's extensive list of final things? The only name that I didn't get mentioned is the only name that I had on my prep sheet, which was Bryden Cass. My understanding is that he has a gammy toe, fellas. Is that what's keeping him out of the squad at the moment, or has he fallen a little bit down the England pecking order? Because for me, what I saw of him
in the ODI squad
last summer and what I've seen of him in international cricket, I really like the look of Bryden Cass. He offers a bit with the bat. He's got a bit of tude, bowls some decent wheels, does a little bit with it. I thought there was a lot to like there. Or is he fallen down the pecking order a little bit from your guys' point of view?
No, I think it's been an injury thing. He's sort of back in the Durham squad now, playing playing the 4-day stuff, and I think the view or the outside my perspective is that they're just trying to get workload into him before they
Yeah.
potentially bring him back in. I
It's
think
between
we
him and
thought that.
Potts, isn't it, Jamie? Probably.
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and I think we all thought that looking forward to the Ashes, he could have a role to play. Is he quite similar to sort of your Scott Boland in terms of the attributes there and the role that he plays for Australia? He's
A bit quicker.
arguably a bit quicker, but kind of like, yeah, he felt as though he could do certainly more than a job in that England lineup. So I think the interesting thing about England is while that we do feel as though we've got places that are already nailed in, they're also not afraid of keeping their powder dry a little bit as well by saying, actually, anybody who hits form, there's potentially a place for you there. And James Root has done that. And I think that will be the case over the summer. I think there's lots of people that they're keeping their eyes on because you don't want to be blinkered to that somebody who has a magnificent end of the summer and
Yeah.
domestically and then gets themselves on the plane. So I kind of see that as being a bit of a method for them working. But
Yeah, I think there's room for a bolter as well on that plane to Australia. Someone could, could sort of come up with the goods. Ryan Ahmed's brother, interestingly, is one that's been talked about. Bowls office gives it a real rip. So yeah, I think that again, England aren't going to be afraid to do that if they see someone that they think has the mental fortitude to be able to cope with that. But you would think the age-old adage is you don't want someone making their debut in the Ashes. I think it largely is going to come from this core group. But yeah, is there anything else we want to talk about on that series? Do we want to talk a little bit about Zimbabwe? No notes.
I don't have any notes, I'm afraid.
I don't have any notes. It'll be interesting to see how Ben Curran goes. I'm quite actually looking forward to watching him play against England, given that two of his brothers have played various lengths of career for England. So I think that will be interesting to see. And he'll get lots of support in England too. As well. So yeah, interesting to see how he goes. But look, it's going to be an interesting year for Zimbabwean cricket, right? They've got a lot of cricket on their calendar. Things are starting to look up from a development perspective a little bit. In that country. So it remains to be seen how they're going to go on the field. But I think it's going to be a big year for them to start to re-establish themselves as a regular player in that international cricket game.
A couple of tests against New Zealand later on in the summer, in the year. So yeah.
Yeah. And again, I'll recommend another cricket podcast here. If you want to listen a little bit about what's going on in Zimbabwean cricket, Mike Atherton and Nasser Hussain did a brilliant interview with former Zimbabwean captain, and not to be confused with former British spin doctor, Alistair Campbell. Who's now a blueberry farmer. That's Alistair Campbell, former Zimbabwean cricket captain. He's now a blueberry farmer. Go and seek that out because he does go into, I guess some of how Zimbabwean cricket has rebuilt over the last little while. The fact that there's some cohesion. Interestingly, the fact that this is the first time in a little while that the Zimbabwean team are getting a tour fee for coming overseas. So England, the ECB have given them a pretty decent amount of cash to come and tour, which allows them to do that and allows them to funnel the money that they get from the ICC into their grassroots rather than in funding 16 business class airfares and hotels and all that kind of stuff. So really, really good listen if you want to find out a little bit more about that Zimbabwean squad. On the theme of squads, let's talk about the World Test Championship final beginning on June the 11th at the home of cricket, the Thomas Lords Ground in St John's Wood, London. Both squads announced a week or so ago, I think. Maybe not quite that long ago, 4 or 5 days ago. Baldy, I'll let you sort of off the long run on that Australian squad. I'm keen really to understand from you. Travelling reserve of Brendan Doggett. Tell us a little bit about him, and then where are there some kind of selection questions going into that final 11 for Australia? Sam Constas on the plane as well.
Yeah, it is, as it always was for Australia in terms of the selection. I think the top of the order is really the spot that everyone is talking about. Travis Head will go back to the number 5 position.
Maybe.
You've got Bo Webster in the middle order that did a good job in the Border Gavaskar Trophy. And obviously Cameron Green is now coming back into that Australian squad as well. So if you have a look at the Border Gavaskar Trophy team, plus Cameron Green is on the plane to England as well, there is a question mark about whether Sam Constas will keep his spot at the top of the order. And if not him, then who will partner Usman Khawaja? Because you would expect Australia will try and find a spot for Cameron Green somewhere in that middle order for Australia. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think his last out was that game against New Zealand where he got 170 odd or whatever it was. So somewhere in there, I would expect Cameron Green to slot back in. It might be that he slots back in at 3, Marnus goes up and opens, and Sam Constas smits out.
Chat, eh?
That has been a bit of the chat. I think
Inglis.
Well, Inglis has done well, right? But is he a better cricketer than Cameron Green at the moment? I'd say the answer to that is probably Cameron Green is ahead of him in the Australian pecking order.
Green's a better bowler.
Could be.
Inglis is probably a better keeper.
Yeah, but Alex Carey's done no wrong for Australia over the last 2 years, right? It'd be tough to displace Alex Carey in that wicket keeping position. I think the bowling order sorts itself out, provided all those guys are fit and don't have any lingering injuries. I think the Australian bowling attack goes in with those 4 main guys, and then potentially supplemented by maybe Bo Webster and Cameron Green, and that's a really good 6-man bowling attack when you get a little bit of spin and a little bit of medium pace, a la Colin Miller from the turn of the century from your man Bo Webster, and big mitts in the gully. Any balls going into the gully?
Who would have gully?
I think
those two,
I think you have 2 gullies.
2 gullies, yeah.
You have 2 gullies that cover about
the whole slips cordon.
45 degrees of the cordon. Yes. For me, it's the Constas versus Cameron Green thing. I would give it to Cameron Green. I think he's much more likely to win Australia a Test match with bat or ball. I think he's probably, even as enigmatic as Cameron Green has been, a much more consistent cricketer than Sam Constas has been. It's going to be a long career for Sam Constas. Cameron Green, probably not in this Test match. I think they'd stopgap it with putting Marnus up to the top of the order and put maybe even Green at 3, leave Smith at 4. But I think long term, it's probably not the worst idea to have Cameron Green open the batting. His technique is good, as long as it's not a workload issue coming off a long stint at the bowling crease.
So good at 4.
And then coming back. I mean, it depends on what the makeup of Australia's team is once Smith retires, right? Once he retires, a whole bunch of things open up for all sorts of different cricketers in that 11, and it will fall right into Cameron Green's lap, I think, to be the long-term number 4 for Australia. So I don't expect there to be too much shuffling of the deck chairs in this one. I think, the scuttlebutt is that Marnus will go up to the top of the order if they make a change, and then Cameron Green slots in at 3, Steve Smith at 4, Head 5, Bo Webster at 6, and then the rest, barring injury, should sort itself out for this big fixture.
How much can we read into this this kind of squad with a view to the Ashes? Is this kind of the pot that they'll be picking from? Is there any outliers that potentially come into that?
Yeah, I think Marcus Harris was probably unlucky to miss out, given that his county championship form has been really, really good. I don't know if the rumours are true in that, you hear the occasional, well, we've tried Marcus Harris and we've tried him a bunch of times and he hasn't been a tremendous performer at international level. But, the only thing you can do when you get dropped at international level is go back and score runs at first class level. And every time he gets dropped, he goes and makes tons of runs, whether it's in Australia or particularly in England. So I think he's the one that has to be in consideration. The backup bowling stocks for Australia look pretty good, even though you take into account the perpetual injury to Joe Richardson. You've got Lance Morris, you've got Xavier Bartlett, you've got a bunch of guys sort of backing up. Scott Boland is probably the 4th seamer. You've got Brendan Doggett now, who has come from Queensland to South Australia. He's had a really good season for the Redbacks. They've won the Sheffield Shield, which I think has probably given him the nod over Michael Neser, even though Neser's performances for Queensland over the last 3 or 4 seasons with bat and ball have been outstanding. I think Neser's, again, unlucky to miss out on a Test squad selection or a Test match 11 selection. But it's one of those things at right place, right time for Shield winner Brendan Doggett. There are lots of other fast bowlers that are waiting in the wings. I like Jordan Buckingham. I think he's going to be one for the future as well. I think he looks like a likely prospect. And Fergus O'Neill as well as one of the other ones, a Victorian, looks like he could be another one that's waiting in the wings there for any injuries that might surprise us come Ashes time.
Let's talk a little bit about South Africa. So I think a couple of probably themes for them. Questions at the top of the order. So their recent series, I think, was against Pakistan, and they had, I think, Dazorzi, Markram and Ryan Rickleton all opening the batting in that series. So they've probably got sort of where are the deck chairs there. And then we've got Lungi Ngidi back in the mix from a seam bowling perspective to add to the likes of Patterson and Kagiso Rabada, Marco Janssen, etc. And probably, I hate to say this with the two spinners on the podcast, maybe a scenario where they don't go in with Maharaj and go with an all-seam attack at Lords. Just saying that's a potential option. But any other thoughts on that South African squad and its makeup?
I mean, we'll do a full preview of this a bit closer to the time. But I mean, you look through that and you can put a pretty good 11 together. I know we at the time we talked about all of the chat around South Africa about are they the second best team in the world? Have they been the second best during this cycle and all of this stuff? I think they've been underrated, and I think they're going to give a pretty good account of themselves in this Test championship. They're a good side. I do worry about the batting. Is probably if I have any question, you look through that lineup, you go, okay, can I guarantee that I'm going to get 300 or 350 or 400 or whatever I'm going to need here? But that bowling attack, it looks very, very dangerous. And yep, I actually think I think it'd be a mistake. I mean, way too early to be talking about team selection. But Maharaj has been brilliant, if you ask me, for the past couple of years. And he's shown, even over here in New Zealand, he showed that he can play in lots of different conditions and things. So I think he's someone who's become a fixture in their side and should remain there.
I'm just trying to bring cutting edge insight to the podcast, Stu. As you said, we will preview that in a little bit more detail as we approach the 11th of June. Yeah, a little bit too early probably to be looking at that Lord's deck and saying there isn't space for the chicken dinner.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would throw in is that Middlesex, I think, if memory serves me correct, this season have been playing with two spinners. So, yeah, granted that maybe the Middlesex track wickets might be slightly different to the Test ones, but if that's anything to go by, then
it's been very dry in England. It's been ridiculously dry. We may have already had the whole of our summer by the 18th of May. Let's turn to what will be the longest segment of the podcast because we're going to talk about New Zealand and the search for a coach. I see some breaking news on Quick Info that there is an opportunity for them to just rip out the entire England backroom squad now of McCullum, Jeetan Patel, and now Tim Southee, and have a ready-made coaching lineup. Tim Southee recently named as a specialist skills consultant for the England team. But jokes aside, Lip, what have you got on your little radar for where New Zealand are going with the coaching search? Have you been approached? Is the first question I have.
Yeah, that's why I put it on there. Baldy mentioning a few weeks ago about specialists. What is it? Special analytic with an analytical mind and things. I was thinking, gee, that would be a nice little gig to get. But no, it's not. It's not me, as far as I'm aware at this point in time. The reason I did put this on there, one is so that we could talk about the fact that Southees, or at least mention that Southees joined the England squad. I did see an article though that kind of went through a lot of the different candidates, and I found it quite interesting because one, it sounds like they reached out to Daniel Vittori, and Daniel Vittori said, no, thank you. I think I think there are probably a number of reasons. He's got a nice role with Australia at the moment.
Looks good in green.
The Ashes is he's got the Ashes, he's got the Sunrisers gig, he's got other gigs around the world. I would imagine, I have absolutely no idea. I don't know if this article is even correct, but a lot of those guys, the Flemings, a lot of the other people that are named that have the IPL gigs, it's a lifestyle. The fact that they can be more flexible, they can earn probably more money than they can earn in the New Zealand role, and they can, at least kind of call their shot a little bit about how much work they want to do and how much they don't. So when you take on the New Zealand role, it's going to be a bit different. But it was interesting to see that Shane Bond apparently has applied for the job. We've had Shane Jurgensen, who was the bowling coach and then went back to be the Wellington head coach, has also applied for the job. And Rob Walter, who was the South African white ball coach through a very successful run, took them to the final. Was he? No, he wasn't quite for the Champions Trophy or through the Champions Trophy, but they had a very good run under him as white ball coach. But he's been living in New Zealand, based in New Zealand. His family has been in New Zealand that whole time. And so he's, stepped away from that. That was getting too difficult. But, maybe a New Zealand gig is more appealing. So it sounds like he's thrown his hat in the ring. But I think the number one, the most interesting thing I saw from this article, that there was a quote in there from, a source, a player that basically said that it is unanimously the players' preference that it not be split roles, which I thought the way that all of the press releases from New Zealand, Gary Stead has stepped down from being the white ball coach, that he's going to consider his future, all of that kind of stuff. It seemed like they were at least priming the public for a split role kind of scenario. And if that is to be believed, that the players are very much, we should have one boss, we should have one group, then it's going to be the end of Gary Stead as New Zealand coach, and we're going to see a completely new person take over. And look, we don't. There's no sort of point, I don't think, in running through all of the different people that we've just mentioned, because I think they all I think would have a strong case to do a good job there for New Zealand. But I just found that quite interesting, and I think good for New Zealand cricket that I think that caliber of those three people applying is pretty strong. It sounds like people like Gillespie did not apply, but there are some good candidates out there. So I'm excited to see what unfolds over the next few weeks, because it's been sort of hanging over the New Zealand side for a while now. We haven't quite known what's going to happen after this cycle, and it's a good time, I think, if they are going to refresh. There's a lot of young players on the horizon. New Zealand's just beaten Bangladesh A in a New Zealand A, Bangladesh A sort of series over in Bangladesh. Adi Ashok took 5 for and picked them up a win there. So there's a lot of young players on the horizon, the likes of O'Rourke, Abbas, all the Reece Mariu that we've seen. So this next little cycle is going to be fascinating, and sounds like we might see a new name at the helm.
There you go. All the runners and riders in there. Really interesting point around that. That sort of comment, unattributed comment, and whether that's the preferred structure, or whether that's, as you say, directly sort of saying that Steady's not wanted by that particular individual, or that's what they're getting from the grapevine. But I guess a lot to unpick there, and certainly in terms of questions of structure, I think it's a weird one, isn't it? I think most organisations would say pick the structure first and then worry about the personnel. Cricket coaching seems to be the other way around, doesn't it? If you get someone, they almost say, "This is what I want to do, and this is how I want to structure it," and then they get given that that ability and that free reign. So be interesting to see who comes out on that list. We've got any other business on the podcast, given that we're at a lazy 1 minute 9, 1 hour 9 minutes. Raj here to keep us honest on the timing. Is there anything else you want to throw into the cricketing hopper this week, or should we cover it all next week?
Nothing from me, Your Honour.
Mike Hesson's been named Pakistan white ball coach, so we'll see if he's still coach next week when we talk about this.
I just say good luck to Mike Hesson. Yes. Right. On that note, we will end this episode of the Top Order podcast. We'll be back next week. We'll be talking IPL, and it's I guess coming into the final stages by the time we'll chat about that, and then probably some more red ball news as well, leading into that sort of first test of the English summer, England versus Zimbabwe, closely followed by that World Test Championship final, which, as we said, we will preview on the show. But for now, it's good night or good morning, good and blessed from us all here in both Auckland and the sunny United Kingdom. We'll see you next time on the Top Order podcast. Good night.